February 19th, 2025, started as an ordinary morning. At 9:30 a.m., Nancy Richards parked her car outside Ashland Grocery Mart. Nancy, a retired nurse, always did her shopping early to avoid the crowds. She wrapped her scarf tightly around her neck, bracing against the bitter chill as she made her way toward the sliding glass doors. Inside the store bustled gently with morning activity, shoppers carefully maneuvering carts through narrow aisles, quietly chatting with familiar faces. For Nancy, the warmth and friendly smiles of the grocery store had always felt safe, a stark contrast to the icy stillness outside. Just a mile away, hidden within thick forest, something stirred. An enormous grizzly bear, desperate, starving, and unusually aggressive, was slowly moving toward the town. Winter had been harsh, stripping the woods of food sources. The bear's instincts were primal: hunger, survival. It lumbered through deep snow, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. The faint but unmistakable aroma of food guided its steps, pulling it ever closer to civilization. Inside the store, Kevin Miller restocked shelves, humming quietly to himself. At 24, Kevin dreamed of leaving Ashland someday, but for now, stocking groceries paid his bills. He glanced up as a young mother entered with 2 small children, their laughter breaking the quiet. Kevin smiled, waved gently, and returned to his task. It was moments like these, small, normal moments, that made life in Ashland feel simple and safe. None of them saw the dark shape emerging from the tree line just outside the parking lot, pausing and then moving forward again. Standing at the checkout line, Sarah Collins checked her watch impatiently. Late again. She had promised her boss she'd be in early today, but now that seemed impossible. As she watched the elderly cashier slowly scanning items ahead of her, frustration tugged at her nerves. Sarah sighed, reminding herself to be patient. Outside, unseen, the bear paused briefly beside parked cars, its massive frame partially hidden. It sniffed the air, drawn by the scent of meat, bread, and humans. Hunger drove away its natural fear of people, pushing it forward relentlessly. Back near the store entrance, store manager Rick Jensen reviewed a clipboard, checking off inventory. Rick had managed this grocery store for nearly 20 years and knew every shelf, every employee, every regular shopper. It was his second home, comforting in its familiarity. But today, as he glanced toward the front doors, he saw something strange, an enormous shadow passing quickly outside. Rick frowned, curiosity turning to sudden alarm when he noticed shoppers near the door freeze, staring outward. At that instant, the doors exploded inward. Glass shards showered across the entryway floor, scattering shoppers who screamed and stumbled backward in confusion. The bear burst through with terrifying power, landing heavily inside the store, its huge body shaking shelves and displays. For a single awful moment, everything seemed to pause. Silence descended, heavy and unnatural, broken only by panicked breathing. All eyes fixed on the massive grizzly, its thick fur matted with ice, eyes burning with primal hunger. Nancy stood frozen, unable to move. She had seen bears before, living near Ashland. Wildlife encounters were not uncommon, but never this close, never this dangerous. The bear roared, a deep, thunderous sound vibrating through her chest, breaking her paralysis. Chaos erupted instantly as terrified shoppers scattered, knocking over displays, desperately searching for an escape. The bear swung its massive head from side to side, sensing movement everywhere. It lunged toward an older man near the bakery section, who barely had time to raise his arms before the bear's claws slashed through him, sending his broken body sprawling. Kevin dropped the boxes he was holding, staring wide-eyed at the horror unfolding in front of him. He had no training for this, no instincts, no plan. All he felt was overwhelming fear. Shoppers ran wildly, pushing past each other in panic, trampling items fallen from shelves. He moved toward the back storeroom, hoping for safety, but was quickly blocked by a terrified crowd jamming the narrow doors. Shouts of desperation mixed with screams of agony as the bear continued its relentless attack. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she scrambled behind a checkout counter. Peering around it, she witnessed scenes of unimaginable violence. A mother shielding her child knocked aside by a swipe of enormous claws. Another shopper pinned beneath massive paws. She reached desperately into her purse for her phone, hands shaking uncontrollably. Dialing emergency numbers proved impossible. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate, the world spinning around her. She pressed herself against the counter, eyes squeezed shut, praying silently for rescue. Rick struggled to maintain control of his emotions. He knew the store layout better than anyone. If anyone could help, it was him. Moving quickly behind aisles, he reached the customer service desk, pulling open drawers frantically, searching for something useful. His breath caught as he grabbed a shotgun he kept hidden for emergencies. Loading it hurriedly, he turned toward the bear, now ravaging the produce section, fruits and vegetables tumbling around it. He took aim, trembling hands barely steady enough to pull the trigger. The gunshot echoed sharply inside the store, deafening in the enclosed space. Rick watched as the bullet hit the bear's shoulder, embedding into thick muscle. The bear paused, shaking its huge head angrily, but did not fall. Instead it turned, locking eyes with Rick, fury burning even hotter in its dark gaze. The bear charged him, a blur of unstoppable rage. Rick stumbled backward, firing another shot wildly, missing completely. In seconds the beast was upon him, slamming him violently against the counter, claws tearing into his flesh, his screams ending abruptly. Nancy, hiding beneath an overturned cart, held her breath. Blood pooled on the floor near her, the metallic smell suffocatingly thick. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly, praying silently, heart racing painfully. In that moment, survival depended solely on luck, something she felt slipping away with each passing second. She listened helplessly as more screams pierced the air, followed by sickening silence. Kevin finally forced open the storeroom doors, stumbling inside with a handful of survivors. They barricaded the entrance behind them, panting heavily, shock etched onto every face. He leaned against a shelf, legs shaking, overwhelmed by the sounds of destruction outside. No one spoke. No one could find words to match the horror they'd witnessed. They listened numbly, hoping desperately that help would arrive soon. Outside, Ashland's emergency responders raced through snowy streets, sirens wailing, calls flooded dispatch, frantic, pleading voices describing unimaginable terror. Police and wildlife officers prepared themselves mentally, knowing the situation they faced was unlike anything they'd encountered before. Each mile brought them closer to a nightmare that would haunt Ashland for generations. Inside, the grocery store descended deeper into a horrifying silence. The bear moved slowly now, stalking through ruined aisles, sniffing out remaining survivors. Bodies lay broken, scattered and still. The store, once a familiar comfort, had transformed into a scene of devastation. As minutes passed, the few still alive hid trembling, hearts pounding painfully, hoping against hope that rescue would find them before the bear did. But help was still too far away, and as the grizzly bear's heavy footsteps drew nearer, each heartbeat became an agonizing countdown. They were no longer safe. They were no longer in control. They were prey, and the bear was coming. Officer Jake Thompson tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the cruiser raced toward Ashland Grocery Mart. His heart pounded hard, each beat matching the frantic rhythm of the sirens, screaming through the crisp winter air. Dispatch had described a scene of utter chaos. A grizzly bear loose inside a grocery store, multiple fatalities, and numerous terrified survivors still trapped. He glanced at his partner, Deputy Laura Bennett, whose expression mirrored his own silent dread. They had trained for many things, but never something like this. Jake knew grizzlies well enough to understand the raw destruction they were capable of. As the parking lot came into view, the sight stopped him cold. Shattered glass littered the ground, cars abandoned with doors wide open, groceries scattered everywhere. It looked less like a store and more like a battlefield. Inside, Nancy heard the sirens and felt a faint glimmer of hope. She remained hidden beneath the overturned shopping cart, limbs stiff from holding perfectly still. She'd spent her life helping people as a nurse, but today she felt utterly helpless. Footsteps approached slowly, the heavy dragging sounds of something massive. Her breath caught as the bear stopped just feet away. It sniffed the air deeply, searching for survivors. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, yet instinct kept her frozen, knowing that any movement would surely invite death. Kevin and the survivors barricaded in the storeroom could also hear the approaching police. Their relief was overshadowed by dread as the bear lingered just outside their hiding spot. It pounded heavily against the storeroom door, its enormous weight splintering the wood. Panic surged through the small group, their eyes darting around desperately. Kevin grabbed a fire extinguisher, holding it tightly, though it felt useless against such an immense creature. He had never felt so small, so vulnerable. Outside, Jake and Laura stepped cautiously through the shattered entrance, weapons drawn. Immediately, the overwhelming scent of blood and destruction washed over them. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. Jake motioned silently to Laura, signaling her to cover him as they advanced slowly down the aisles, boots crunching broken glass beneath them. In seconds, they saw the full horror of what had unfolded. Bodies lay scattered and broken among destroyed displays, their final moments etched onto faces frozen in terror. Laura swallowed hard, steadying herself against nausea. Jake's jaw tightened in rage and disbelief. He had patrolled Ashland for 10 years. This store was part of their community. Now it was unrecognizable, torn apart by violence he could hardly comprehend. A sudden movement caught Jake's attention. Turning swiftly, he saw the bear's immense shape charging directly toward them, eyes burning with primal fury. He raised his rifle instinctively and fired, his bullet striking the grizzly's massive chest, barely slowing its advance. Laura fired too, bullets embedding into thick fur and muscle but not stopping the predator's terrifying momentum. Jake shouted for Laura to move, both officers diving aside, just as the bear crashed past them, slamming into the wall. The bear roared, shaking its head furiously, blood now seeping steadily from its wounds. Injured but not defeated, it turned, eyes locking onto Jake, teeth bared in a ferocious snarl. Jake fired again, a shot grazing its shoulder. Laura, standing firm, aimed carefully, pulling the trigger once more. Her bullet struck the bear's skull, causing it to stagger briefly, shaking its head in disorientation, but still moving forward, driven by rage and adrenaline. Back in the storeroom, Kevin and the others listened desperately to the gunfire and roars just outside their door. Kevin felt his pulse pounding like thunder. The bear slammed again into the storeroom door, splintering wood loudly, sending shelves inside toppling. It wouldn't hold much longer. Kevin stepped forward, gripping the fire extinguisher tighter, his body shaking uncontrollably, but determined to fight for his life if necessary. Nancy heard the bear charging again, heard officers shouting commands, more gunshots echoing through the destroyed store. She remained motionless beneath her hiding spot, whispering silent prayers. Suddenly, the bear slammed into her shopping cart, knocking it aside effortlessly. She screamed instinctively, staring up into the face of the enormous grizzly now towering over her. It reared back, preparing to strike, and Nancy shut her eyes, bracing herself for death. But at that very moment, Jake appeared, firing a desperate shot. This bullet pierced deeply through the bear's neck, sending blood spurting violently. The creature stumbled backward, collapsing against a refrigerated shelf, Its breath rattled, growing shallow as it lay still. Finally subdued by overwhelming injuries, Jake exhaled shakily, adrenaline surging through his veins, unable to believe he'd survived. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Jake and Laura exchanged tense glances, breathing hard. The nightmare seemed over, yet the scars left behind were permanent. They moved swiftly now, calling out to survivors hidden throughout the store. They found Nancy first, alive but trembling, reaching gently to help her stand. Kevin and the group emerged cautiously from the storeroom, shaken and pale, stepping around bodies carefully, disbelief etched on their faces. Outside, emergency medical personnel rushed inside, attending survivors immediately. Stretchers rolled past shattered doors, sirens wailing once again as ambulances departed for nearby hospitals. Ashland Grocery Mart was reduced to ruins. When the count was finally tallied, the tragedy was devastating. 11 people dead, countless lives forever altered. Ashland, once peaceful and ordinary, would now carry the scars of this day indefinitely. In the weeks that followed, people asked many questions. Why had the bear attacked? Was it starvation, desperation, or something deeper wrong with nature itself? Wildlife experts debated food shortages and unusual weather patterns, theories that did little to comfort grieving families. For survivors, the memory was too vivid, too personal. No explanations could erase the terror they'd endured. Nancy struggled each night with nightmares, vivid images replaying constantly. Her sense of safety shattered, replaced by deep anxiety she could never fully escape. Kevin quit his job, unable to step back inside any store without fear gripping him. Ashland itself struggled to heal, residents attending memorials and vigils, promising never to forget those lost that tragic February morning. For Jake and Laura, the attack changed how they viewed their town, their job, and the wilderness surrounding them. They had confronted nature's ruthless power firsthand and survived, but the scars remained beneath their brave facade. They patrolled differently afterward, always cautious, knowing danger could erupt unexpectedly at any moment. Months later, the town quietly rebuilt Ashland Grocery Mart, dedicating a simple memorial outside to honor the victims. Names engraved on polished stone, silent reminders of lives lost in unimaginable horror. Slowly, painfully, the community moved forward, forever changed but resilient. Yet no one who'd been there ever truly forgot the sound of the bear's roar, the piercing screams, the crushing helplessness they'd felt as nature violently asserted itself. Because that day, everyone learned an unforgiving truth. Nature does not negotiate. It waits, watches, and when the moment is right, it strikes without mercy.